Alright guys, so I'm doing a video today about Holley EFI setup basics, like, for the most part. Just a rundown of how to get the software, install it, do all the stuff that goes along. I guess not really install it, but it's more like opening it up and deciding how you're going to set everything up and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to be going over our information from Lewis's 7-second Nova. We had the car at Derby at MIR, and we went like 779 with it on kind of a conservative pass, nothing real crazy for what we have available on the car. But we spent 4 days at MIR with it, and it was fresh. Like, I literally had it done Wednesday, and we took it to the track on Thursday. So I didn't really have much testing time. I only ran it on 20 pounds of boost on the dyno, and was kind of like, let's just see where it goes from here. It was so kind of down to the wire with, what we had going on. And we were basically getting two cars ready. It was not only Lewis's Nova, but also the CTS that Mike owns. We were both trying to push both cars to get there and get done and be able to do our thing. So I'm using his information as our baseline for what we're talking about in the video. But it kind of is a global thing where what I'm going to go over works for basically everything. It just more or less, I'm just trying to help show where to navigate, where to look at, what to set up and what to do. And then I'm going to make a couple episodes that go along with this that actually will show some of the extra stuff that we have on Lewis's car, like how to set up the shock sensors, how to set up the drive shaft speed sensor, how to interpolate the data so you actually understand what's going on with it, and it's not just random data that you have no idea what's going on. I have a clip here I'm gonna put up of the car going into the sevens, and then I have some stuff that I can kind of lay in later with another video and kind of show, like, okay, this is what we did because this happened, and have the clip for it and everything. Because basically with us, like, every time we are doing a pass, we have video that goes along with it. I have a ton of data that goes along with it, and I'm going to go over all that and how we get there and how to set it up. So probably a lot of information, maybe a little boring, but I get a lot of questions about how to do so many random things. It's hard to just do one video about one specific thing. I'm more or less looking at doing a basic setup for, like, the system parameters, the fuel and the timing, and how to set up your IOs. And then from there, I will get more involved with the boost control, trans control, and all that other stuff that goes along with it. And we'll kind of break it down. I'm going to mainly focus on what we're doing with Lewis's car because it's the most recent one that I've been working with, and it's still something we're kind of growing with, I guess you could say. So I'm going to be using his, kind of going over it, showing you guys some of our data and all that kind of stuff, and kind of going from there. So thanks for tuning in, and I'm going to show a clip of his car, and then we're going to go over onto my laptop, and I'm going to show you some of the stuff on the screen. Alright guys, so we're over on my desktop now, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the software for Holley. So Holley uses a software platform for the HP and the Dominator. This is not what I wanted. Sorry, my recording software I'm using is trying to do an update on me. Anyways, so Holley uses a software platform for the Dominator and HP called Holley EFI. And then the Terminator X has its own separate software platform. The two of them are very similar to each other, but there's a couple things in firmware end of stuff where the hardware doesn't do as much work on the Terminator X as what you can do on the Dominator or the HP. One of the biggest things is obviously boost control, and we'll get into that when I get into the boost control side of things first. The other one I wanted to bring into play, because it is just as relevant with what we're talking about here, is the Holley Sniper. Any of this information that I'm going to be using for basic startup, it crosses over on all three platforms. The Terminator X, the Holley EFI, and Holley Sniper software, they all look the same. They all are configured the same way as far as sitting down and actually putting in the, the general information of what the vehicle is. But that being said, the Nova is running on V6. I'm going to talk about V6 and what we're doing with V6 just because of that's what we're using on the Nova. I have multiple cars that are tuned on V4 and V5, as you can see it over here on my desktop. And I haven't switched them over to version 6 yet because there is a little bit of bugs. It's very new. There's there's a lot of really cool stuff about it. But, sometimes certain things don't work the way they should. And I'm actually having a couple little issues with boost control on the Nova. And I'll go into that later on. But anyways, we're going to open up V6. And I'm going to show you guys a little bit of how to get through it. So basically, when you first open it up, if you're plugged in, it's going to be it's going to say download from ECU here. Or you can open a global file or open a data log, whatever you're trying to do, or you can create a new one. My suggestion for a lot of people when they're trying to put together a base file, and basically what I do is I open a global file based off of what I'm doing. So if you go in here and you go to your base calibrations, you can look at each one of these and see what it is. Okay. You can also, I'm going to go back here. If you go to custom cals and you go to GM, and we're talking LS because that's what's in the Nova. They have some predetermined base maps. This is very similar to what all of the other platforms that I tune do. I do a lot of Haltech. I do a lot of AEM. Even on the side of running a Megasquirt, there's a lot of base mapping out there that you can start with. So basically, with Lewis's car, when I first got it actually running, his Dominator was used. So it had a methanol LS tune in it, which was kind of cool the way they had some of the stuff set up. I'm always interested to see how other guys do stuff. It doesn't mean that there's only one way to do anything when it comes to tuning. Everybody does stuff a little bit differently, and that's why it's always beneficial to kind of get educated on what the other methods are. And I like looking at other people's tunes because sometimes I learn something. But anyways, what we're going to do is this is the file that I ended up using. This is a Holley made file. 427 LSX race gas twin turbo drive-by-wire. Now, basically, I went in here and I took out the configuration for drive-by-wire because we're not using it. Okay, and then you come through, and the first area I like to start with is the system parameters. Okay, so you're gonna select what the ECU configuration is. You have HP or Dominator. This is what we were speaking about earlier. Then you're gonna come down. You're gonna look at the engine. And you're going to decide how you want to set the thing up. So basically with Lewis's car, his is a 388 and it's obviously 8-cylinder. We're on gas, but you can select E85 or methanol as well. It's running Q16. I'm running it on speed density, but you have other ways to configure this: Alpha N, VE base, VE combo. I just stayed on speed density. And it'll auto-populate everything for you. You got to also come in here and select which wideband sensor you're using. If you get this wrong, and I've had it happen already, if you get the sensor set up incorrectly, what ends up actually happening to you is you're so backwards with trying to get the fuel learning right that it never works right because the sensors do read incorrectly for some reason between one setup to the other. I don't really know why, it's just the way it works. But anyways, so Lewis is on a Bosch sensor. I only have one. And then your startup settings are clear flood. This would be if you're showing more than 50% throttle, it won't run the injectors. This is also your enable prime and the fuel amount that it'll prime when it goes to fire up. These settings are similar on the Terminator, but they're at a different spot. There's some stuff where once you work on multiple platforms of Holley, you start to notice that they put things at different places. And I'll actually show you something about that in the ignition once we switch over there. You're going to come down, you're going to select what your fuel injection type is and what you're doing with all this stuff. I will go over this information when I open up Lewis's tune, but this is basically you're going to come in here and you're going to select what you're doing. Lewis is running, he's running a set of 210 injectors, but you can come down here and you can select whatever they have in here, and then you can also modify it. So like what I did with his, if I remember correctly, I selected a set of 220s at 60 psi. We'll have to go back and look at that when I go back into his. I don't really remember exactly. And then they're also a high impedance injector. This is another thing that's very important to select. If you're running it on low impedance or vice versa,
It will make it run kind of goofy. I had a car come in on a Dominator. This was like in the spring. It was a big block car with a Dominator on it, and the injector type was it was misconfigured. So basically, the injectors read incorrectly, and because of that, it never ran right down low. So it was like very like weird how the way that the fueling occurred on it. So just make sure that you have the correct injector data in here. You can also come in here if you're running multiple injectors. You can set how they're set up. If you're running multiple stages or whatever. Ignition parameters. On Lewis's car, he's running a 58X, so we have just 58X. This is something that right here that's different between the Dominator and HP compared to the Terminator. On the Dominator HP, if you want to go in and change the rev limiter settings, you actually have to go into system parameters and change it here, okay, in these settings here. This is something you can't do while you're live. So if you're online and connected, which see how it says offline right here, if you're online, when you go into a Dominator and HP, you can't change these settings. You have to disconnect and reconnect to be able to change these, which something that's a little bit different between the Terminator X and the Holley Dominator HP. I don't know why they have it like that, but they do. On the Terminators, it's actually in the Spark configuration. There's a rev limiter tab, so you can change it in there. But basically, this is going to be where you're going to determine all your other stuff that goes on in the ignition. If you're running a custom tooth setup, that's where you would select it down here, and you go in, and there's a whole other tab to configure it, which is where you're going to come in and you're going to set what it is. You could actually do it either way. With the 58X setup, you can select the 58X tooth. You got to put your inductive delay with your timing offset, and then set the rest of it all up with it. And then this is where you can actually go in and set up your dwell table if you want to do that as well. Honestly, I'm not doing any of this on Lewis's. I'm just running the stock stuff. We're still running stock truck coils on that car. So, I don't really see a need to change anything at the moment, but it's something that, is available. You could actually just configure it with the 58X, but be able to go in and change the coil and plug settings. So your next one is going to be your sensor scalers and warnings. This is where you can come in and set up your RPM scale for all your tables, your oil pressure, your coolant temperature, or fuel. All this stuff is all going to be configured here. And you can set up the gauges so that when you're on the gauge panel, you actually get a direct reading of what's going on. Next tab is going to be the basic inputs and outputs. This is where you have your fan, your torque converter, your timing retard, your data log, the CAN bus, and staging. Really, there's not a whole lot to really set up here on a like more of a race car end of stuff. But the fan is obviously one that's important if you're running a secondary fuel pump. If you're doing anything with air conditioning, it's all right here. The last one we're going to look at before we switch over, I'm going to actually open up Lewis's current file. Last thing we're going to look at is the closed loop settings. These are the settings that are going to get the car to run when you first go to fire it up, because you're probably not going to know where to put the VE table at. So it will self-learn on its own, to get it to where it'll at least run. That doesn't mean that it's going to self-learn the timing, but it's going to self-learn the fuel. Out of the box, this is the way these settings come. It'll go, basically Holley maxes it to 100% learn. On closed loop and learn parameters, they have it 50. You have to enable learn parameters if you actually want it to work, but closed loop, it will learn on its own, and it's an automatic and enables closed loop as soon as it's running, basically. Usually what I end up doing is I enable minimum coolant temperatures, and you can enable an RPM if you have a real low P cam, and you don't want it to sit there and try and chase its tail at idle. This stuff's kind of important depending on what you're trying to do. Really, at the end of the day, the computer is only as good as you put the information in for it to have. So if you tell it that you want it to learn 50%, it will learn 50% over the time that it has. If you put together a good VE table, there's no reason that it needs to learn that much. It should be together, and most of the time when I'm at the track with any of the cars that I'm track tuning, I might see them go 10% of learn. That's what you kind of want to look for. A factory setup, basically they'll throw codes on a factory computer if they're going above 20 to 25% closed loop learning to tell you that there's an issue. So these are things that you can look at. There's no way for you to actually have a trouble code in the Holley, but you can actually look at it and say, oh, I'm seeing it, like I'm cruising, I'm seeing it learn 30%. If you knew you had that fuel right at the beginning, you can go and look at it and be like, maybe I have an intake leak or something along those lines going on. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to open up Lewis's file here. I got to actually find the current one. But basically, to open up another file, you just come over, hit File, and these are your recent ones that you've had open. Or you can just go hit Global File, and I believe I'm on 9. And we're not going to save this because I don't really need to. So coming back to Lewis's setup, you can see I have it set up that it is doing, a 388 VE based. It is running set at 210s high impedance at a base pressure of 58. And then, we're running a sequential setup on the injectors. So basically, the other thing I wanted to kind of point out is we have a rev limiter of 8100. There's a high and low on that. I have it set for soft because I hate when cars bang the rev limiter really hard. And I have rev limiter 1, which is this is the launch control. That's at 4500. The other things that are relevant in here is we have our ignition cranking timing and the crank to run RPM. These are important when you go to start the car up and actually make it fire up every time. Otherwise, I'll show you quick with the basic IOs. It has the staging. So this is for the bump button. Basically, this is how I have the bump button set, where you hit the staging button. It's a secondary stage. When you bump the button, it releases the trans brake and re-engages it. Basically, with being able to do this, you're able to have a bump button run through the Holley that you don't have to run a bump box. And then you can just set your pulse. It's pretty straightforward. We had to run some weird box before when we were running the AEM in Lewis's car, and now we're doing it with the Holley. I have the box in there still, but we're not even using it. Here we are again with our closed loop learning side. As I said, if you have it set right, 20% is good. I have this set to 100 up here because I never dyno tuned it above 25 pounds of boost on the dyno. So I have it set so that it will actually target learn up top. So if we need to, it will compensate for the fuel. But this is something I'm going to end up changing because we're going to go for a little bit more boost here down the road, and I'm going to be able to fine tune that in a little bit more. Learn parameters is the same. As you can see, I have it set for 20% the whole way across. Once we get up into the higher boost, it can learn more if it needs to. Next thing is the individual cylinder. I actually have EGTs in this, so I have 2 setups where I saw 7 and 1 were a little leaner than the rest. So what I ended up doing was I added some fuel on them to kind of balance them out on the EGTs. Inputs and outputs. It has a rev limiter. It has a staging input 1 and staging input 2. These are defined by how you can come in and change the input type. So like if your trans brake is working off of a power input, you would want to run a power input in there and not have to run like a secondary stage relay or something like that. It was actually something I had to do on the AEM. I had to run 2 relays. Basically, one engaged when the trans brake was on, which would give a ground to the ECU to tell the ECU that it was getting on the trans brake, which is a pain in the ass. Basically, Holley makes it nice enough that you can go in, just select what your input type is, and then you're good to go. So this is what we're looking at with the basics of system parameters on a Holley Dominator or Holley HP. I'm going to get into some of the other stuff here real quick, and we can kind of go from there. All right, so the next thing you have, now you need also, I should probably go over this, you need to populate these toolbars that you have on top. So to do that, you would hit add individual configuration. You have to do this when you're not connected to the ECU. So you're going to come in and you're going to select what you want. Okay. Now, when you first open up a file, if it's already pre-populated like we had the one earlier, you're able to get the information you need that's already there. But let's say for whatever reason we go and we put nitrous on this thing. I can go in and I can put a base single state wet progressive nitrous setup in it. And then it's there. If I don't want it anymore, I just come over and I hit nitrous and then it's gone. Okay. You're always going to have your basics up here. But the other ones like the boost, the transmission, that stuff is not going to be there. You're going to have to populate that yourself. So next one is going to be sensors. You're going to have to come down through here. And as you see, as you come down through, it just drops down what you're working on. So you can always go back to it if you need to. But you're going to have to select your sensor. We're running the stainless steel Holley 5-bar on this. We're running a stock GM coolant temperature sensor. I have a custom thermocouple in this for air intake temperature. Basically, what the temperature sensor does is it's a fast reacting temperature sensor that is sold by T1, and this is the tabling that goes along with it. It's a little weird looking, but it works. So next one is oil pressure. We're running a Holley sensor, and then fuel pressure is a custom sensor that we're running that goes to 150 pounds. So the sensor setup is very important. You have drop-down boxes to select if you're running something outside of what it is. But this has a 150-pound AEM sensor in it, actually, because it was a crossover from our old platform, and I had to make my own scale for it. We'll now go over to fuel. This is a fuel table. Doesn't look too fantastic, but it is what it is. Basically, I'm not going to get into how to tune a VE table, but this is a general basis of what the VE table looks like, and this is what the graph kind of looks like too. This is the learn table, and this is the target AFR table. Lewis's car is a drag car. It doesn't need any of this crazy shit that we have going on with it, really. But for the most part, I want it to idle at 14. I want it to cruise at 13.5, and when it's in boost, I want to see it in the 11s. Very straightforward. I'm happy with where it's at, and it's making really good power where we're at with it. For our second outing with it, we already have accomplished our goals within, man, I don't even know how many. I think we're maybe 10 passes into the whole car, and we're going way faster than I thought it was going to go right away. One thing I want to kind of go over in the learn table is, and this actually isn't the current file because this wouldn't be here otherwise, but what the car is always going to be closed loop self-learning. This is where learn table comes into play. And when you have something like this go on, you can come over and you can hit transfer learn to base. Now, once you transfer learn to base, you're going to have a blocky, notchy, all kinds of crap going on here where it looks, you see there's a couple high spots in the fuel graph. So highlight the whole table and come through here and just click the smooth button a couple times. And if you come back over here, now we don't have any high spots. Okay. It's really kind of a pet peeve of mine. Every fuel table is going to be different. You never really know how they're going to set until you see how the turbo comes in, how everything works together, all that fun stuff. But that's the way it works. All right, so the other tables that matter in here are going to be their accelerator enrichment. If you have it, then it feels like it's kind of dead when you're getting in the throttle or anything like that. All these tables are going to play a role into that. I'm not really going to explain them because every car is different. Every car needs to be tuned to what you have going on with accelerator enrichment, and its coolant temperature, air temperature, all that stuff plays a role in it. You also have fuel modifiers. This would be if you want to do anything with coolant temperature enrichment, air temperature enrichment, whatever. Startup enrichment is the same way. This is how much fuel it's going to put in on cranking. I usually just make this table pretty linear because once you have it right, it usually just fires right up anyways. Next one we're going to look at here is spark. All right, so you have your base timing table, you have your base timing graph, and then you have your parameters and your modifiers. Okay, this is for crank timing retard. We're not running knock sensors on this, so it doesn't even matter. So we're not even going to get into it. Then you have your modifiers, which is going to be your timing versus coolant temperature and timing versus manifold air temperature. One mistake I see a lot of guys do is they go and they pull way too much timing very dramatically with temperature. I used a lot of my data off my personal drift car. My drift car, I've gotten that thing to 300 degrees coolant temperature, and it's still been fine. And it goes out, and I ran the same engine for 5 years. I actually just broke it this last time I had the car out, but I've had the same engine in my car for 5 years, and I have literally beat the crap out of it and overheated it. I can't tell you how many times, but it wasn't to an extent where it was boiling over. It was just the fact that the coolant temperature was very high, and obviously the IATs were as well. But with a proper tune, this stuff will take care of itself, and I broke my motor because I forgot to put oil in it. I was actually about a quart low, and I don't know how familiar any of you guys watching this are with drifting, but oil is very dramatic with what we need there when we're going into some of the turns and stuff, and I ended up spinning a rod bearing. So it is what it is, but coolant temperature and manifold air temperature are the two modifiers we're looking at here. With these tables, you don't need to do anything crazy with them. Just make sure that you do have some sort of fail-safe built in there. for you to go and get your stuff set up. Now, the last thing I'm going to touch base upon when it comes to tuning with the Dominator and HP is your I/O table. Basically, this table is set up so that you have all your stuff in here that you're trying to get input on or trying to get output on. As you can see, we're running a lot of stuff on Lewis's car. But these are where you come in and you set this stuff up. So, we have EGT1. It's a 5-volt sensor. This is the ECU pin it's on. It's enabled. You can come through and configure it and set it up for what it is. It's pretty basic setup, straightforward kind of stuff. This is all defined here. And then you have your outputs, which we actually have a couple of different things going on here. But basically, these are your standard outputs on what we have going on. You can see I actually have a couple configured here that we're not using, but they were there for original testing. I just never pulled them back out. And then you have some warning functions that we're not using anyways. And then once you have all that stuff configured out, you have all of this that you have to deal with because you have to go in and select where you want to put your inputs at. As you can see, you have multiple connectors on the Dominator. On an HP or on the Terminator X, you don't have as much availability here. But one of the things that I will point out is I'm not using input 1 because it doesn't work on this computer for some reason. I have no idea why. There's something wrong with it, and I was having an issue when we first got the car working that what is now input 36, which was our rev limiter, staging input, trans brake, all this. See how they're all stacked? You can actually stack inputs in one side. Because I have all these stacked like this, it wasn't working on input 1. And I tried to just use one input on it and it still wouldn't work. So I had to move it over to B18 input 36, and we use it over there now. But as you can see, and this is stuff I'm going to get into later in another episode, we have all of our inputs here that we're using. So we're using coolant pressure. We have a converter line and trans pressure sensor in this. We have our EGTs, we have drive shaft, we have dome PSI, and then we have our shocks, and then we have our rev limiter stuff. The other one that you have to configure as well is going to be your outputs. Your outputs are going to be your boost. Depending on what solenoid style you're using, you might use 1 or 2 outputs. You're also going to have one for a shifter if you're running a shift solenoid and it's electronic and not CO2. Even if you're doing it with CO2, you're still going to probably have to configure it with how you're going to do it. And then have another output for the fan. And then over on J3, we're using the trans dump. We have a 2-stage dump valve on this car, and this is how that is configured. It's something I'm going to get into later. And then there's also a staging output, which we don't really use. As far as that goes, that's really it. There is a lot of other stuff in here to go over and look at. Basically, I guess I should touch base upon this. You can see I have 2 things up here. This is the shift master enable out or input, what it's looking for, and a manual boost builder. I'm not actually using these 2 things, but they are set up and configured. If we ever needed to, they would be there. I would just have to pin it. So what ends up happening is when you have unassigned inputs, they sit up here at the top. Let's say I wanted to assign this to, I would need a ground, so I need to find a ground output, which we're going to go down J4, and I can just drop it in. Now we have our shift master enabled. But we're not using it, so it's going to stay up there. That's really it. I guess I want to go over, I'm not going to go over how to break down a data log yet, but what I'm going to actually talk about is I want to talk about how to set up the data logging. You can set it up a couple different ways. Basically, this is a normal data log. It is triggered when the TPS is greater than 50%. So you just come down through here, you set it up, you hit OK. When you connect to the computer, it puts all of it in there. So I want to thank you guys for tuning into this one. Like I said, I'm going to make another one, go over some more information about, we're going to talk about boost, and we're going to talk transmission, and we're also going to talk about advanced output tables and input tables. And then I will also go over some of the data logs, and we'll kind of go from there.